Happy Wednesday, guys. We're here on our Movable Roots YouTube or our Instagram TV, right? Is that right? Doing a live video, and we are going to talk about something that we've had quite a few questions about, and also kind of something that's perfect timing while we have a unit that we just insulated. So excited to do another kind of sit down with a builder chat. We're going to try to keep this again, in that 20 to 30 minutes max. Feel free to get on and ask any type of questions that you may have, and maybe we can answer them. Hopefully there's something that we can answer, not too far over our head technically. So almost 12 o'clock. Nikki said I have to wait till 12 to chat about what we're talking about. So we hope that everybody's having a good week. Hope that everybody's staying safe out there, and hopefully the weather's nice where you're at. I've seen, talked to some customers of ours that are in the negative 18, negative 20s, which is pretty significant, right? So vital that you have some good insulation. So it's 12 o'clock. We're going to be talking about insulation. What types of insulation? We're going to go into that just a little bit. There are multiple different options out there for insulation. We're going to talk a little bit about the basic ones that you can go to Home Depot or Lowe's and find, and we're going to talk about the choices that we make in our homes. So to kind of elaborate on that, there's wool insulation, there's insulation being made out of recycled denim jeans, there's insulation out there that can really help with people that have severe allergies, things like that. So there's so many different options out there for insulation and the different purposes. I encourage you to look into those if that's a need for you, and pick something that works for you and your build. We're going to talk a little bit about what we have chosen and why we chose it, and why we think it works at this point. So we're going to go into initially, what does R value mean? So it's an insulation term or a building term that basically, in the short definition, is basically a measurement of how heat transfers through a product, right? So heat is transferred in multiple different ways, but in insulation and R value, they're talking about conduction. So meaning when something is touched, a heat source is touched to the product, how well does it resist that heat transfer through the product? The lower the number, meaning like an R1, means the less restrictive that is. It means that the heat's probably going to pass through it very easily. The higher that number, the more resistive it is to that transfer, right? So again, it's like the lower the number, the less R value. The higher the number, the more R value. So when you're talking about insulating a space, you want to talk about a lot of different things. You want to talk about not just how you insulate the space, but other things. You've got big window openings as well, right? So you wouldn't want to do a super high insulation in the walls and then have no insulation, or a cheap single pane, no insulation window, because that is going to allow that heat transfer into the unit. And when we talk about R value in a structure, we're talking about keeping the heat out in the summertime and the heat in the wintertime, right? So in both cases, it's a very important factor. When it's super hot outside, you want the inside of the house to be cool, so you don't want that heat transferring through your building, and you want it to kind of hold that air-conditioned air in. In the wintertime, you don't want that cold to come in, and you want the heat that your heating sources are putting out there to stay within the house, right? So it's important in both aspects. So we're going to talk about bat insulation first. This is a sample of bat insulation. It's a very inexpensive product. It does have kind of a fiberglass unit to it. It does have a paper back to it, and it's something that basically is cut and you can get it pre-sized for specific 16-inch on center spacing, and it would basically go into that space. Cost-wise, this is probably your cheapest option, and it's fairly easy as well to put in. Again, this is something you can go to Lowe's or Home Depot, your big box stores, and you can get right on the shelf. It's 99% of the time it's going to be in stock. You don't have to wait for anybody to do it. You can do it yourself. So that's definitely a pro to this. One of the negatives of this is it does have that fiberglass kind of texture to it. It can get make you itchy. You're going to want to make sure you're wearing proper clothes, gloves, long sleeves kind of stuff on this when you're putting it in. Another negative is that this can, if this gets wet, this will hold water. If you ever have a leak or there's some sort of penetration of water within the system, this is going to basically hold that water and can create mold and mildew issues. So that's definitely a negative of this product, right? The other kind of negative of this product is that in a standard 3.5-inch wall, which is what a large majority of tiny homes are built with, a 2x4 wall, which is thickness is 3.5 inches. This can only get you an R value of about an R11 to an R15. And it's just the way that the bat insulation is made. Now there are some other steps that you can do to get that R value a little bit higher with bat insulation, but that's kind of a standard R11, R15 in a 3.5-inch thick bat insulation. Again, if you've got a 2x6 wall, you've got a deeper wall, you can get a higher R value bat insulation. So we'll move on to rigid foam insulation. There's multiple different types of this out there. It is basically a foam kind of rigid insulation that uses a lot in SIPS panels and different kinds of construction, but they also do it in a sheet, like a 4x8 sheet. The benefit of this is you can get a higher R value in your wall with a rigid foam. You can get an R18 all the way up to potentially an R28, 29. But you've got to think about the labor side of this, installing it into these gaps. So obviously insulation happens in the build process after your rough end trades are complete, right? So you wouldn't want to insulate before your plumbing, your electrical, your HVAC is done, because then you have to pull insulation out to get those items through the walls. It would be a nightmare, right? So all of those trades are done. When those trades are done, their wires, all of the different things, the rough end part is all over the place within your wall. So the labor and the ability to get this into a wall in a very uniform way is going to be somewhat difficult. So this is something that we have never used. We will use it in specific things, but not on a whole house. We won't use it on a whole house. It is resistant to water, so that's a benefit compared to the bat insulation. Now, what you see behind me is a spray foam insulation. The spray foam insulation has two different types. You have open spray foam and you have closed spray foam. And the big difference is the R value and also the soundproofing, right? So open cell is much more fluffy and it's softer. If you've ever seen it in person, it has great sound barrier to it, but the R value per inch compared to closed cell is not equal. So it's about half. So a open cell spray foam you usually see completely built all the way out to maximize that 3.5 inches, and you see it kind of shaves down. It's and again, it's a very soft kind of insulation once that chemical reaction kind of happens in that gun. Closed cell insulation is much harder. You can hear it's very rigid. It's very what's the word I'm looking for? Firm, right? So in our building process and what we have found, and some of the studies that we read about closed cell insulation's rigidity, it basically adds, from some of the studies, they say double, if not triple, the shear strength of your wall, right? So shear meaning, in construction, shear meaning basically the flex and the push and pull basically of your wall system, right? With no insulation and the sheeting on the outside, the plywood is the only thing that is kind of keeping that shear factor in place. But by adding this closed cell insulation, it adds to that rigidity. It's very, very strong, and we feel like the benefit of that is we're on a moving platform, right? We are, in some cases, moving the house monthly, so that extra strength and that rigidity is key in a moving structure. So that's one of the big reasons why we went with closed cell insulation, and also it's our standard within our build process. The other benefits of closed cell versus open cell is the R factor in overall inches. So closed cell has an R value of between 6 and 7 per inch. So you figure if you fill this wall up, we typically try to go between an R18 to an R21 within the wall for our exterior walls, which is above your typical standard residential wall insulation. So with closed cell insulation, that's definitely possible in a 3.5 inch wall. With spray foam insulation, with open spray foam insulation, we can only get about an R11 or an R15 in a 2x4 wall. So we can't get that higher R factor that you're going to want to have if you're in those colder climates. So those are the differences and the kind of values that are within the different types of insulation that we have done our research on, and why we chose closed cell. When you're talking about insulating your structure, you want to do things, and I talked about windows a minute ago, but we're going to talk a little bit about the air gaps, right? So your insulation value can be decreased by gaps in openings. So whenever you open your door or you open your window, you're now allowing that conduction of heat to either move out of your structure or come into your structure. So having a gap without any type of insulation, and typically your window framing openings are usually about 1/2 inch, maybe at most an inch larger than your window. When you order your windows, typically your window manufacturer will say you should have a rough opening of this size, and that way that the window fits in there and you kind of center it in the window. Well, that 1/2 inch to 1/4 inch of space can really allow a lot of heat transfer or cold transfer, depending on the situation. So we take cans of the spray foam that you can get at Home Depot. It is made for windows and doors. It is a slower expansion, but we fill these gaps right here around all of our windows to try to minimize that. Same thing with the front door. The door, once the door goes into the opening, there's typically gaps around the door frame and the actual framing. We fill that up with that same insulation. Make sure, if you do that, if you're a DIYer and you're doing that, that you get the window and door insulation. There is a couple of different types of insulation out there in a spray can. Some will expand quite a bit and will actually push the door opening or bow the opening in a window or a door to where the unit won't open or close correctly. So you definitely want to make sure that you're looking into that a little bit further. One of the differences also with this types of insulation, and I'll talk a little bit, the main difference between batt insulation and closed cell or open cell spray foam insulation is cost. So I'll refer to closed cell. So this batt insulation, you can go to Home Depot and get, it would average about just under $1 a square foot on your wall. So basically taking your wall square footage on this house that we're standing in, that would be roughly about 1,000 square feet. So this would cost about 1,000, if not less than $1,000 to insulate your entire house. Spray foam insulation is double, if not a little more expensive than that. So for spray foam closed cell, that would be one of the cons in a DIY factor if you're really kind of looking at your budget, is that this same structure for spray foam insulation for closed cell would take about $2,000 to $2,500 in cost, right? So it is a pretty significant cost when you're looking at that overall budget. The other thing to think about too is the types of products that you're using on the outside of the structure that can help with that R value. Something that we found recently, and we talked about it in a previous video, was this this insulation, this structural insulation board that you can use on the outside of your home. The benefit of this is that this comes with an R value of 3, right? Where normal plywood, they basically say you can get every piece of material has an R value, and the average R value with wood is an R value of 1 per inch. So a 1/2 inch piece of plywood is going to have 0.5 of an R value, so it's not very much. It's going to allow heat to kind of transfer through that. Having a 3 times that, over 3 times that on the outside will help with that thermal break of allowing that heat transfer from the outside into the house and reverse outside or inside out, right? So I'm throwing a word out there called thermal break. I'll expand on that a little bit, but basically that thermal balance is where that heat transfers through the product, right? So this product here is going to stop the heat transfer, but this product can allow that heat transfer to happen because it doesn't have that R value. The benefit of the metal stud is it is kind of a C, so you are able to really get a lot of the insulation around that metal stud that can help absorb some of that heat transfer, but you definitely want to take into some considerations some things on the exterior as well, if it's an option to, again, stop that thermal break of the heat transfer. And then this would ultimately give you on your walls R value of 3, plus your insulation. So it's definitely an interesting product. They do have others out there that are even thicker, that have a higher R value, but when you think about you're building your structure, having to stay within that 8.5 foot wide kind of restriction, so you don't have to have permits and stuff, the thickness of products is definitely something to overall take into consideration. So I think we've covered the basics of insulation. Again, I'll go over kind of why we chose closed cell. We chose closed cell, one, because we get a higher R value per inch, roughly between 6 and 7 per inch of spray foam, and then also the rigidity that it adds to our structure. We think those two are far outweigh the negative of the cost, right? Hopefully, if you are going to make that decision, you look at those options, you see what's in your area. You can research that. You could probably Google in your area options for spray foam insulation. There's probably multiple different contractors out there that can do it for you. But again, that's our option for spray foam, and why, again, some of our houses, some of our base pricing is significantly higher than some of the others out there, because this is our standard. We use this in all of our houses, and we feel like it's something that shouldn't necessarily be cut out of the budget if at all possible. So we have any questions or anything, Nikki? All right, guys, so we're gonna probably do this again in a couple of weeks. Hopefully we covered some stuff that was interesting to you. Hopefully we got some information out there that maybe you didn't know. Send us some comments on this. Make sure to reach out when Nikki posts these kinds of things and ask for things that you want to know about, things that you have questions about. Let us know and we'll try to answer as much of it as we can. We hope you guys have an awesome rest of the week, and we'll see you guys in a couple of weeks. See you.